Mark, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
So I'm really excited to talk a lot about, you were very knowledgeable about the Pacific, obviously, and, Taiwan. There's been some interesting developments with Taiwan recently. I guess the big thing that happened was that the State Department, on its webpage talking about its Taiwan stance, it removed the part where it said Taiwan is part of China. And it also removed the thing that said the U.S. does not advocate for Taiwan independence. Like, what do you make of this? Is this some kind of major shift in U.S.-Taiwan policy, strategic ambiguity?
Well, I'm uncomfortable saying that right now, only because we've had the president say things about Taiwan multiple times over the last 15 months that were then walked back slightly. We had the whole fiasco, if you remember, when the Taiwan health minister was on a website. It was on a virtual presentation with the map in the background that showed Taiwan a separate color from China, and they turned her off, didn't turn her off. It was accident. It was a one-time only glitch done only to Taiwan. So what I would say is, I'm holding my breath until we have an actual discussion of this by senior State Department leadership of what new interpretations there are. It doesn't have to be changes, but what new interpretations there are to how we see the decisions that we made in 1979 and the subsequent Taiwan Relations Act and other things. And so once we get that State Department discussion, I think then we can have a reasonable discussion about the decision. I will say I'm not uncomfortable with any of the two things I heard today, but I'm uncomfortable doing it without having a forthright discussion about it.
Just that they suddenly changed it on the website and people noticed, essentially. Yeah. It is interesting that it doesn't really have to be, like you said, a change in the policy, but a reinterpretation, because the way that you could kind of read what they did was, instead of centering the PRC in its discussion of U.S.-Taiwan relations, it kind of just took that whole thing out of it, where now that page is mostly just talking about U.S. and Taiwan and their relations with each other without saying anything about, I think, before it was like explaining what the U.S. one China policy was, and said it acknowledged that there's only one China, that, we're not supporting Taiwan independence, like you said. But now it doesn't say that we're supporting Taiwan independence or anything like that. It just kind of takes the PRC more out of the calculation. And I don't think the PRC can be really happy with that.
It's like passing the Bechdel test, but with respect to China.
Like the opposite, where you don't talk about China?
Something like that.
Bechdel test? Is that like where you determine somebody's an android?
No. We'll talk about that later.
Okay.
So one thing I'd say about this is that I would be not surprised and disappointed if we hear later on, like, oh, we didn't mean any new interpretation. We're just cleaning up that website, like some kind of, lack of definitive declaration. I think that would serve only to have pissed off China, disappointed Taiwan, and confused our other allies and partners. And that would be frustrating. It reminds me, Elliot Cohen did a pretty damning piece recently, and I think in either Foreign Affairs or Foreign Policy, where he discussed the lack of statecraft in the last few national security councils. And if we're doing this kind of thing without even the way we did it, even if it turns out we've totally changed our policy, to do it by a website, erasure first, is a lack of statecraft, and we're just not practicing that very well right now.
Well, actually, I think the Biden administration has done a fantastic job really emphasizing the essence of strategic ambiguity. Like when Biden was asked by a reporter, can you vow to protect Taiwan? And Biden said, yes. But he didn't mean yes, and it got walked back. I mean, how can you be more ambiguous than that?
Maybe he meant yes, but then people were... I feel like this is what people would talk about all the time when Trump was president, that, like, he would misspeak a lot. And, Biden historically has done a lot of the same kind of thing, but we're just less obsessed about it now.
Yeah, well, I mean, Trump had all the best words, so he doesn't There's nothing for Biden to use. Trump has them all. Well, okay. Perhaps for the sake of the audience, we should establish what strategic ambiguity is. So what was that, and how did it affect how you operated in the Pacific?
So I think strategic ambiguity was an introduction, trying to introduce risk into Chinese decision making by not stating what our specific intentions were in any particular crisis or contingency. So we wouldn't answer the hypothetical, and we left it. It is a way of introducing risk, which I guess is a way of introducing a deterrent effect into Chinese planning. I do think at some point, though, if strategic ambiguity is not backed up by forceful positioning, in other words, it's easy to be you can be very effective when you're strategically ambiguous and significantly stronger than the adversary. Then they're deterred. Of course, strategic ambiguity lost a lot of its effectiveness over the last 20 years as the Chinese undertook an extensive and very effective modernization of their armed forces, where they began to change the balance initially inside the first island chain, and now really between the first and second island chain. So now the United States, we're not carrying a big stick because we're not speaking strong because we have strategic ambiguity, and we're not carrying a big stick because we didn't have the military and in many ways our economic relationships with Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia, our percentage of trade with them versus Chinese trade percentages went down as well. So, and all these kind of elements of national power, we were getting weaker in the Western Pacific while trying to hang on to this strategic ambiguity. I think that's the challenge. Like, I get the value of strategic ambiguity when you can back it up with overwhelming economic and military power if it turns out you were willing to do something. Strategic ambiguity loses its effect if it's not backed up by that kind of overwhelming economic and military power.
Well, that definitely took a hit with the whole Scarborough Shoal incident, where China essentially took over territory claimed by the Philippines. And, unlike Taiwan, the U.S. does have a military agreement to protect and defend the Philippines. And the U.S. did nothing.
No, we did something. We got the Philippines and China to talk it out, hug it out, and they agreed to both back off, and then China did not.
And we got ourselves into a legal, vortex of is Scarborough Shoals covered under the treaty, I've read a lot of our treaties, being assigned to both U.S. European Command and U.S. Pacific Command, and I would describe the treaties with Thailand and the Philippines to be exceptionally weak treaties. You know what I mean? They're slightly more than, if you have a problem, give us a call, we'll have a cup of tea. But, they're not written in the same kind of way that our treaties are written with NATO and then with Japan, for example. And we're not willing, for a lot of reasons, most centered around the value of the partner to the United States, willing to make the kind of statements that we've made for Japan. We have been very clear, I think, since 2012 now, about the status of the administrative control of the Senkaku Islands and our belief that it falls, underneath the U.S.-Japanese Mutual Defense Treaty.
Do you think that's been a reason that the Chinese Communist Party has focused more on the South China Sea than they have on the East China Sea? Because before then, they were definitely making a lot more moves towards the Senkakus as well.
Yeah. And they still, I don't want to, they still every year, like an anaconda, get slightly tighter on the Senkakus, closer and more numerous ship patrols, closer and more frequent air overflight, aviation overflight, military aviation overflights. So they're still messing with the Senkakus, but they're not signaling it the same way they do. That's done in a much more quieter way. And the Japanese response is done in a very, in their typical kind of subtle way of just trying to very closely not escalate and match Chinese actions. Whereas in the South China Sea, I think most of they're competing there with countries that desperately need some of the resources in the South China Sea. So you're just going to see a more I think there, for a lot of reasons, you're going to see a more combative approach. And you're exactly right. Overriding it is not a U.S. guarantee. So I think that's why you see a little more competitiveness, a lot more competitiveness overtly in the South China Sea. And it involves Vietnam, Malaysia, and the Philippines.
Yeah, I mean, for years the U.S. told China not to build artificial islands in the South China Sea, and then they did. And then the U.S. response was, okay, just don't militarize them. And now at least 3 of them are fully militarized. So we can see that the U.S. is not being very effective in the South China Sea.
But we are being ambiguous, and that's strategic.
Good point.